Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this these new forms of presentation. Another one of a series that SFHA are doing. This is our 8th webinar in the series, and it's my first chairing, so forgive any glitches or inconsistencies. Delighted to be welcoming Michael Cameron, Chief Executive at the Scottish Housing Regulator, who you'll all know, so I probably don't need to give him any further introduction. Michael's here to discuss the regulatory approach during the crisis, the changes and flexibilities that have been introduced, and what other changes might be coming. Michael is going to do a short introduction, and then we'll open it up for questions. So please use the Q&A function in the bar at the bottom of the screen, not the chat function for questions, or it'll just get lost. But do use the chat function to comment, to speak to each other or to anyone at SFHA who is moderating the call today. And the chat will be recorded as part of the event, so just a bit of a warning about that, I suppose. And a copy of the recording will be shared after the event. Having done all that, and with no further hesitation, I'd like to ask Michael to do a short introduction.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks very much, Sally. Firstly, I hope you're all well. And I think it's probably worth kicking this off by saying, when we're going through something just now that none of us have ever experienced, probably none of us ever thought we would experience or have to manage this type of situation. And we're all kind of finding our way as we go. Some of what we'll do in response to this unprecedented set of circumstances will work, some of it won't. So I think it's really important that we're ready to learn from each other's successes and what didn't work. And I know that the SFHA have set up different ways to facilitate the exchange of information amongst landlords, lessons learned, experiences. So I think that will be absolutely critical in getting us through this extraordinary set of circumstances. Early on, we at SHR recognised that this was going to be an exceptional event, and that it was likely to endure for an extended period of time. So it was back in the 18th of March, if you can cast your mind back that far, we effectively suspended routine regulation to allow us to focus on monitoring the impact of the pandemic on social landlords and on tenants and others who use services of social landlords. And also to let you focus on responding to support your tenants and your local communities. Over the period since then, we've issued a range of guidance, and we've created a particular part on our website where you can access that guidance. And much of that guidance has been in response to questions that landlords have asked us, and we thought it was certainly worthwhile sharing the responses to those kind of questions much more widely, so that everyone has that single place of reference to pick up on what, from a regulatory perspective, we see as important issues. One of the things which we did very early on with Sally at the SFHA and Scottish Government was recognise the need for there to be a forum that allowed all the key players in social housing to come together and discuss and agree responses to some of the issues that have emerged over the period of lockdown. So the Social Housing Resilience Group was formed, and that's kind of chaired and facilitated by the SFHA. And that's been a really useful forum to ensure that we can pick up on the kind of key issues. One of the things which that group was keen to do was to get a clear set of information on the impact of the virus pandemic on social landlords and their operations. And we agreed that we would be able to use our facilities to gather in information from landlords and to analyse that and provide that back to the group so that they could then determine what responses might be needed in those situations. So we've put together what will be a monthly return. We issued that yesterday to all landlords. Hopefully you've had an opportunity to see that. I'd particularly like to thank the smaller group of landlords that kind of road tested this for us last week. And that's now available. And we're looking for the first set of information to come to us early next month for the month of April. We'll pretty much use the first submission as a bit of a pilot, a bit of a test. We can tweak it. We can see what works, where there have been challenges for landlords. I know that in particular it's quite a tough time frame in terms of getting information to us so quickly after the end of a period. So we'll keep that under review and see what works and whether we need to make any changes to that. Probably also worth saying that we'll also keep under review the timeframes for the usual regulatory returns, the annual returns on the charter and the financial returns that we normally get from all of you every year. We've kind of extended out those timescales for now, but we'll keep that under review as to whether we need to make further changes to those timescales. Interestingly, when I looked earlier this morning, round about 70 landlords had already started to complete their annual return on the charter, which that actually surprised me that it was up at that level. So we'll keep that under review and see where that goes. We are working remotely. We are all working from home. Our office is effectively closed. We have, I guess, fortunate that we had already set up to do entire remote working with all the IT kit for that. So that was relatively straightforward for us at the regulator to make that transition. I know that's not necessarily as straightforward for everyone to do that. And I think what you do see is as the timescale lengthens, other challenges emerge, and at some level the kind of IT setup becomes a relatively straightforward thing. It's all the challenges around meaningful engagements with people when you're having to do it in exactly this way. But I do also think that it's probably going to result in a fairly significant step change for all of us in how we conduct our business and our engagement. So there's undoubtedly going to be lasting changes for all of us in that regard. Having said all of that, I'll shut up now and happy to pick up on questions.
That's great, Michael. Thanks for that. In strange times and very uncertain times, and you've introduced quite a lot of, as you said, flexibilities, changes as a result of that. And you're clearly saying now that you're open to reviewing that and keeping that under review as time goes on, which is very useful for everybody concerned. One of the things that members have been concerned about is the annual account deadlines, which as we know are coming very fast, and you've been working as part of the group that you mentioned to look at extending that. And I do understand, don't we now, if you confirm this, that the Minister has taken away an action to introduce into the next round of emergency legislation 3 months extension of the current deadline? Did you get that question, Michael?
You broke up a little towards the end, but I think I got the gist of it. We recognised fairly quickly that the current situation was going to present a number of challenges around timescales, and some of those are within our gift to amend and change and extend, and we've done that for the statutory regulatory returns that we've spoken about. But the annual accounts was set in the 2010 Act, so 6 months after the end of the financial year, landlords are obliged under law to give us their accounts, and actually the Act makes it a criminal offence for them not to do so. So we recognised that was going to be a real problem. Now, it may very well be that landlords are able to meet those timescales, and if they are, that's great. But we thought it important to raise with Scottish Government when we understood that they were looking at emergency legislation, that this is a very simple thing to extend that timescale, and that just takes away a concern that landlords might have. It just doesn't become an issue then. So they have, as we understand it, the Scottish Government have agreed to include a provision in the next emergency bill, which should go through in May, to extend that timescale for the submission of annual accounts out by a further 3 months, with the option of looking at a further extension again if that was required. That's going to be particularly important for a couple of landlords, I think it is, whose financial year actually ended in December, so would have been required to give us their account in June. But equally for all landlords, the availability of auditors to undertake the necessary work could become an issue as we push up to that current deadline of September. So I think that's a positive and hopefully relatively straightforward change that we're able to make.
Great. Okay, I think that's going to be really helpful to everybody to have that further extension, that further timescale and period to get the account sorted in what is obviously a very difficult time to do so. You talked about changes to some of the milestones and deadlines for returns. Do you anticipate as part of that any changes to the annual assurance statement requirements?
That requirement is for landlords to give us their annual assurance statement by October. So, at the moment that feels quite far away, but actually most landlords would probably have started some of the work to feed into their annual assurance statement round about now. Those kind of processes would be starting. So we are looking at whether that timescale remains appropriate, or indeed whether we need to look at taking a different approach around the annual assurance statement this year, whether it would work in the same way that we anticipated it working, because we're in extraordinary circumstances, and it is likely to be the case that for many landlords they wouldn't actually be able to say they fully comply with all regulatory requirements, just given the context that we are currently in. So over the coming weeks, we'll be giving a bit of thought to whether we need to look at both the submission of an annual assurance statement and the timescale for that. We'll want to start to work up what the remainder of this financial year looks like in terms of how we will regulate the sector, and probably starting fairly soon, end of May into June, we'll want to start having conversations with the sector about what that needs to look like, given where we all are.
Okay, no, that's really helpful. We have got a question on the question and answer panel. about deadlines for the new fire regulations, smoke detectors being under review. Is this under review because of the again, the difficulties that landlords are facing in terms of getting that work done in the way it was originally planned? And I think, you know, you and I have obviously been party to the Social Housing Resilience Group. This is something that the group has taken up. SFHA is doing a piece of work to understand to what extent it is a problem for landlords, with a view to talking about extending the timescale. So it is a very real issue for us on behalf of all our members and the landlords that you work with as well. Any other thoughts about that at the moment?
Well, I think one of the tasks for the Resilience Group and working very closely with Scottish Government will be to understand what of a you know, broad range of targets that had been set out, whether it's in relation to fire safety, smoke detectors, energy efficiency, climate change, a whole range of things that had the world remained as it was, we would have been looking forward to and looking to understand how landlords were progressing towards those. The world has shifted and we need to understand whether those remain achievable and deliverable milestones, or whether we need to think about setting out a different set of objectives and targets for landlords in that context. Almost all of these are set by Scottish Government. Some of them have a statutory basis, so I think that's a conversation which we all need to have. I think the Resilience Group gives us a forum to start that conversation, and hopefully before too long we start to see some clarity emerging, because I think one of the key things as we move out of this immediate response phase into a recovery phase for landlords will be to understand what the expectations are around some of these existing requirements that are on landlords.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And if I can just remind everyone who's participating in the webinar, if you've got any questions, please put them on the question and answer section of the call. There's a little icon at the bottom which you can use to do that, and then I can ask them to Michael in real time, and you can each see what questions are being asked. Any thoughts about any particular regulatory thoughts about furloughing or aspects members should be aware of when they're thinking about or coming to actually furlough staff? It's a very hot topic across the sector, across the UK in terms of employment and business. Any particular issues, cautions, aspects that you think members should take into account or be aware of?
There aren't any immediate regulatory requirements or issues around the job retention scheme. I mean, I guess the key thing would be to ensure that you properly understand the guidance that's there, the terms of the scheme, so that if you are going into furloughing staff, that you are confident you're doing it in the appropriate way. One of the things which we're doing through the new monthly return is looking to get an understanding of the scope and scale of furloughing that's going on in the sector, as I think that will help the Social Housing Resilience Group understand whether this is and whether it will remain a significant topic for landlords. But from our perspective, that landlords, there's no additional regulatory requirements or expectations around this. I think it's absolutely have an eye to the requirements that are set out in the UK government's scheme on this.
Okay, no, that's great. Thank you for that. I've got a question here about the target of the 50k affordable homes. We know that the Minister has made an announcement that government has accepted it's unlikely to be reached now, given the current circumstances. But I think the question is about still wanting to do the best we can, or the sector wanting to do the best it can. and the concern being about taking time for building sites to gear back up. And members wouldn't want to have to compromise on quality while under pressure to meet a target, either the 50K, which we know is unlikely now, but also the whole development program as was set out in their business and development plan originally.
Yeah, and I mean, from our perspective, the 50,000 is not, you know, there's no requirements, no regulatory requirements on landlords to deliver a specific number by a specific time. Clearly, it's aspirational on the part of Scottish Government, supported by the funding that they have made available there. I mean, I think this fits alongside a full range of issues that landlords will need to give consideration to in terms of where they prioritise activity, how they're going to ensure that they start to recover the position around whether it's new build sites, whether it's planned maintenance programmes, whether it's a backlog of response repairs that may have built up during this period, gas safety and other safety checks. There's going to be a whole range of things that landlords will be giving thought to on how they set themselves to deliver to get back to where we maybe were, you know, 4, 5, 6 weeks ago. And I think this is just one of those range of issues that will be to the forefront of landlords' minds as they look at that recovery phase. In some ways, it may be that landlords think that that is not as immediate a priority as some of those other recovery actions that I've touched on, and I could absolutely understand why that would be the case. It may be easier to leave some sites mothballed until you get your planned maintenance back where what you would want it to be, with your backlogs of various things, whether it's maintenance related or allocations or void properties or whatever. So there is a big agenda there for landlords, and I think the 50,000 is just one part of that.
Yeah, no, absolutely, huge agenda. And a lot of it's going to be about prioritising and time and capacity and resource and basically what's achievable. I've got another question here which follows on quite nicely from that. You know, lasting change is going to emerge from the times that we're in now, and is going to be a very clear consequence of what we're living through. And I think a lot of landlords, as you've mentioned, with annual insurance statements and preparing for those, are already looking at recovery, turning their minds to recovery. Yeah. Any thoughts about what role the regulator could play in that recovery planning process? To advise landlords about what they should look at, what it might include, priorities, and any kind of thinking around that?
Yeah, that's absolutely one of the things that we will want to have conversations with the sector about. One of the things I'm very mindful of is ensuring that our approach to regulation reflects the reality that is out there. There's no point in us saying, okay, that's lockdown finished, let's get back to monitoring and engaging with you in the way that we did before. We know that there is going to be a long tail of recovery on the back of this lockdown, and we need to align our approach to regulation to ensure that that's both supporting the sector in that recovery, but also enabling us to report more widely on landlords' progress in that. So there's a monitoring role for us around recovery. So there's lots of conversations to have about, you know, is the annual assurance statement going to remain relevant this year, or should it be about landlords looking to develop recovery plans and engage with us around those recovery plans? And might we want to look at whether it's through the resilience group or a subset of the resilience group, providing guidance to landlords on what ought to be considered when they're looking at those recovery plans. I think those are conversations we probably need to start having fairly soon. Yeah.
No, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, certainly the Scottish Government are very now clearly not turning their minds, because I think we all have to be very much in the crisis that we're in and respond and react to that. I think that's absolutely essential. And while we're doing that, part of our thinking has to go towards recovery. And certainly Scottish Government are in that space now, and I've had a engagement with them over the last days about what recovery planning might start to look like. And I think there's a very real feeling in the sector in Scottish Government, and I think with the regulator, in terms of what you've said, that a lot of what we're learning in this process, very high, negative as it is, we will want to take forward with us as learning that can be useful for our future and delivering strategic approaches. So thinking about that now, makes a lot of sense while it's still fresh in our mind, and we're working very much on the basis of ways in which are very difficult, very challenging, but equally have a lot to teach us and a lot to tell us about where we need to be in the future and how we might come out of this. So I think any kind of conversations we can helpfully have about recovery would be really helpful and really useful to kind of pass on to the sector.
Yeah, great.
I've got another question here about a completely different topic now, about gas boiler certificates. And again, it's a piece of work we've been doing as part of the Social Housing Resilience Group. And we've had a lot of conversations about extending the requirement from 12 months to 18 months. And you'll be very familiar with this. I've got a member here saying that they've written to the HSE and to the UK government, heard nothing back. And we're in a similar position, I suppose, the Resilience Group, and even Scottish ministers are in a similar position. We've all been lobbying the HSE and the UK government. It's a reserve matter, as everyone knows. And while we have had correspondence back and responses, some of that lobbying, it's not been the responses that we've necessarily wanted, and we're still stuck with the current situation, which is a 12-month requirement on the back of another boiler servicing in that period. It is frustration across the sector. I'm very aware of, we're kind of trying to keep on top of as best we can. Mike, anything more you want to add to that? Michael, did you get that? Right, sorry.
It broke up ever so slightly at the end, but again, I think I got the gist of that. Yeah, it's been such a hot topic, or certainly it was in the first few weeks of this current situation, and I can understand the frustrations that there have been around trying to get this onto a different footing, and it looks like that's not necessarily going to be something that happens, which is then a situation we just all need to deal with. I get the sense that most landlords have taken a pretty pragmatic view on this, that they are trying to do what they can, keeping a clear record of where that's not been possible, and then planning to revisit as soon as they can thereafter. I think in the context of the current statutory requirements and guidance from the Health and Safety Executive, that's the right thing to do. Obviously, gas safety certificates and the timescales around that are something that we look at through the annual return and then our risk assessment. We will be very mindful of the current reality when we look at the kind of information that eventually comes to us around all of that, and we understand that there is inevitably going to be a backlog that landlords are going to have to try and recover. I think the key thing for me would be to ensure that landlords, and I'm sure they are doing this, are prioritising those certificates where they know that there may be heightened risk, whether it's through the age of the appliance or some risks that have already come through in terms of not being able to get access in the past into properties. So I have a sense that landlords are now clear on the position, and that they are doing what they can do.
Okay, thanks for that. I've had a couple of comments that the connection at my end's not great, so I'm really sorry about that. Must just be something wrong with it today, because previously it's been pretty good, but sorry if people are a breakup. Mike, I just wanted to ask you a more detailed question, if you like, about the model rules. The regulatory guidance writes that RSL should notify the regulator if they can't adopt the new model rules, the new SFHA model rules this year. Would it be acceptable to inform you that that will not happen until 2021?
But in effect, yes. That what we say, it's a regulatory requirement that's set out there around what's included in the model rules. Enables you to comply with regulatory requirements. But we recognise that holding the necessary AGMs to get the model rules adopted are going to be really challenging in the current situation. So again, it's one of those things, not dissimilar to gas safety. Best endeavours, let us know if there are significant problems. That we will absolutely take account of that when we're looking at this. This is not going to be a thing which the regulators making a big deal about.
Okay, good. Okay, so that's helpful again, I think, in terms of flexibilities that the sector might need. Just coming back to the data return that you talked about, and the very clear purpose of that being to help and support the sector. So that's kind of coming from a positive place of wanting to preempt any problems before they arise or they become acute, and minimizing the requirements of the return as much as possible, so we're not overburdening landlords at a time when they've already got more than enough to do. Just again, quite a detailed question here. Does the return relate only to the parent organisation? Or is it also seeking about subsidiaries after any of the requirements on the return?
What we've set out is that we're looking for a single return from a group, so that's a consolidated return. We're not looking for individual returns from subsidiary RSLs within a group. Hopefully that's to ensure that it's more straightforward for groups to provide us with the return. And of course, what we're not looking for is information that relates to unregistered subsidiaries, unless, if you look at the staff position, unless staff are delivering services on behalf of the RSL that are core RSL services, then that would be included. But it's very much about the RSL and where it's a group at the group level. Okay,
that's helpful. Just to kind of pull it out a bit broader now, and to look at things that are on a kind of sector level. And I know you haven't had the returns yet, so you haven't got the kind of hard evidence in front of you. But what's your general feeling about how the sector is behaving, responding, coping with the crisis?
We did an initial exercise just to try and get an understanding, a baseline of how landlords have responded. And I think what's been both encouraging and impressive is that the consistency of response by landlords. Everyone recognised very early on, I think, their responsibilities to ensure that they delivered on the expectations from government around social distancing, around ensuring that we aren't engaging in activities that would potentially result in an acceleration of the spread of the virus. And the most landlords very quickly moved on to a footing that was consistent and understood, and have communicated that to their tenants. We've had over 200 notifiable events that relate specifically to the current situation. So landlords have been good at keeping us advised of where they are, whether they're having to make changes. And I think the reality is that most landlords are now on delivery of emergency services only. I guess one of the big questions for us all, and this has been a topic which has come up time and again at the Social Housing Resilience Group, is probably particularly around lettings and bringing voids back into use to ensure that those, particularly in anyone who is homeless or potentially homeless, isn't left without a home at this point, whether that's temporary or permanent. And that's been a big topic of conversation. My sense is most landlords have absolutely recognised the need to ensure that there's sufficient numbers of houses available to enable local authorities to meet their statutory obligations around homelessness. The form will give us much, the information return will give us much more detailed a picture around exactly what's happening in that regard. But as things stand, I think the response of the sector has been good, and in some cases you can see landlords absolutely going well beyond what may have been expected of them into supporting communities and supporting individuals in the communities. Some of the work that we see done is enormously impressive around ensuring that people have the food that they will need, ensuring that people are staying connected into their local communities. These are all enormously important, and I know that many landlords are doing that without having to be asked to do it.
No, that's absolutely right. I mean, I think the sector has really proved beyond any measure of doubt that not only does it provide great homes and it looks after them to absolute effect to provide some of the best quality homes in the country, but the social purpose aspect of housing associations, which is at the heart of what they do, has proved to be hugely necessary and vital in this crisis that we're in. And I think that's been demonstrated time and time again by every landlord in the country. So doing that while at the same time keeping people safe and well, which is the primary concern, and at the same time keeping the business going, is clearly a huge ask for every organisation in our membership and every landlord that you work with, obviously. So yeah, and I think bodes very well for recovery and coming out of this in a way that's economically and socially strong and robust, which is where we need to be as a sector, but also as a country as this goes on. Can I just ask you just a couple of questions to kind of finish off, really, unless I've got any other questions from participants. I'm more than happy to fit those in the last few minutes. What will you take away from this experience? And we're not at the end of it, but the experience so far that has been positive for you, either as a professional or as a regulator in your work, in the professional relationships that you've got? Yeah.
Probably the very first thing, and it's evident to everyone watching this, I think, is the absolute value I place on my hairdresser. But that aside, I mean, I think this has been, a devastating situation. It's been really difficult for huge numbers of people, and we can't step away from that. But I guess one of the things is that you look and see that there have probably been some positives that have come out of this. I think there have been examples of new partnership working, the creation of new networks that will, I think, as you've touched on, Sally, will stand us in great stead as we move into the recovery phase. And then I think the challenge is how we maintain some of that beyond how we work. I mean, as a relatively small example, it's interesting that it has only been within the last few weeks and through, I think, the imperative that the current situation sets out, that all 32 local authorities now have agreed protocols with Scottish Prison Service around the release of prisoners. So there are small examples there where the urgency of the situation has driven forward things that might have been on the agenda for years and not necessarily always got to where you wanted them to be. So it's about, for me, it's about seeing where those positives have been and thinking how we can maintain those positives as we move beyond the current phase of the response to the pandemic. Lots of things around, the growing importance of digital and the opportunities that remote working present, that this type of engagement offers, and whether this has provided almost a step change in how we will engage with each other from here on in. I think that's all quite interesting, potentially exciting. What could come out of all of that?
Yeah, no, I certainly recognise myself quite a lot in what you've been saying, particularly around the excuse me, the cross-sector partnerships, and you've illustrated that with the point about the local authorities and the leaving prison protocols. And certainly for me, one of the most exciting aspects of what happened has been the closer relationship with health. So we've now got a very close relationship with Public Health Scotland, between the sector and Public Health Scotland, and other aspects of the health sector, which we've been trying to put in place and develop for many years, and has now, I think, got to that tipping point because of the crisis, and as the realization has really kind of hit home that we have to do this rather than want to do it or would like to do it. So certainly from my point of view, I'm hoping that that continues and we can take that into the future. I've just got a question from are you expecting? Actually, let me just check the question again that I'm doing it right. Are you expecting notified events from all RSLs? Have you received them from all of them? I think we have now received at least one from just about every single RSL. There are a few that we may not have done, but that's probably more likely because we had ongoing engagement with those landlords, and we picked up the type of information that we would have required at that point. But as I said earlier on, we've had 225 notifiable events specifically related to the current situation. So, more than one from some landlords. And that tends to be when there's either been, they've had to make a subsequent change to their service delivery provision, or as has happened in the last week or so, in response to contact that they may have had from a contractor, for example, who's experiencing some challenges or difficulties or issues. Those are the kind of things that are coming through from us. We've also, alongside that, had landlords coming with queries and questions. And one of the more recent pieces of guidance we put out around governance was a consolidation of some of the questions that we had been getting asked by landlords. So in addition to notifiable events, there's been other contact from landlords that we've had on an ongoing basis. Yeah, okay. Which I think, I'll wind this up now, but I think it's, I think I can speak on your behalf fairly assuredly that that you're more than happy to have those queries, those questions, those inquiries, either directly or through ourselves, and we can send them on to you and explore them either together or just let you deal with them separately. So I think, on an ongoing basis, it's very, very important to keep those channels of communication open, keep the relationships going, because it's only by working through this together that we'll get through it and get to the place that we need to be coming out of it. I think that's probably all the questions I've got from participants. I'm aware we've run over time a bit, but thank you for that. It's been really good to be able to do the webinar and to have you on board. So thanks to everyone for participating, for asking the questions. Thanks particularly to Michael for doing the webinar. And please get in touch with SFHA for any feedback or ideas for future webinars, and we'd be more than happy to think about them and try and organise them. So thank you very much, everybody. And as I said, this is recorded, so you'll be able to hear it and at your leisure. All right, thanks a lot.
Thank you. Stay safe, everyone.